The sun hadn't yet cleared the Sierra Nevada peaks when Margaret Calloway's alarm clock rattled to life at 5:45 in the morning. She silenced it with the practiced motion of someone who had been waking at this hour for 40 years. The bedroom was still dark, but she didn't need light to navigate the modest two-bedroom ranch house on Pinewood Drive. Her feet knew every creaking floorboard, every worn patch of carpet. She sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, allowing her joints to remember their purpose. 76 years had taught her that rushing led to falling, and falling at her age meant hospitals and worry, and the kind of attention she had spent a lifetime learning to avoid. She reached for the reading lamp on the nightstand, its base shaped like an old-fashioned lantern, a gift from Dean 3 Christmases ago. The warm light spilled across the room, catching the silver frame on the opposite nightstand. Walter Calloway looked back at her from 2018, his last good year. He stood in front of his garage, arms crossed, that slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The smile that said he knew something you didn't, but he'd never lorded over you. She touched the frame lightly, a morning ritual she had never spoken of to anyone. "Morning, Walter," she whispered. "Another day." The house settled around her with familiar sounds, the furnace clicking on, the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Outside, she could hear Mrs. Kowalski's sprinklers starting their morning cycle right on schedule. Copper Bluff, Nevada was a town of schedules and routines, and Margaret Calloway appreciated that. There was comfort in predictability. There was grace in the ordinary. She moved through her morning with quiet efficiency. Shower, dressed in her waitress uniform, powder blue, with her name embroidered over the left pocket, though everyone who came into Roy's Diner knew exactly who she was. Hair pinned back, sensible shoes. A touch of lipstick, because Walter had always said it brought out her smile. In the kitchen, she prepared breakfast with the same careful attention she gave everything. 2 eggs scrambled, not fried. Her cholesterol wasn't what it used to be. 1 slice of whole wheat toast. Black coffee in the mug Dean had made in high school pottery class, slightly lopsided and precious beyond measure. She ate standing at the counter, looking out the window at her small backyard. The rose bushes needed pruning. She would get to them this weekend, weather permitting. As she rinsed her dishes, her eyes fell on the photograph held to the refrigerator by a magnet shaped like a Harley-Davidson logo. Dean at 19, all lean muscle and cocky grin, standing beside his father's 1978 Shovelhead, his first real ride. Walter had his arm around the boy's shoulders, both of them covered in grease and grinning like they had discovered the secret to happiness. Maybe they had. She touched the photo gently, then checked her watch. 7:15. Time to go. The drive to Roy's Diner took 12 minutes, exactly as it had for the past 8 years she had worked there. Her 2008 Ford F-150, Walter's truck really, but hers now rumbled to life with the familiar diesel clatter. She had learned to drive stick shift at 16, had taught Dean the same when he turned 15. Some skills you never forgot. Copper Bluff looked its best in the early morning. The town of 4,000 souls stretched along Highway 50, the loneliest road in America, though locals knew better. There was nothing lonely about a place where everyone knew your name, your business, and usually your problems before you did. The morning sun painted the false front buildings downtown in shades of gold and amber. She pulled into the parking lot of Henderson's Bakery, leaving the engine running. Dalton Spears was arranging bags of fertilizer on the sidewalk outside the hardware store next door, his permanent work uniform of flannel and denim as predictable as the sunrise. "Morning, Dalton," she called through the open window. "Morning, Mrs. Calloway." His weathered face creased into a smile. "Martha's got fresh bear claws today. Your favorite, if I recall." "You recall correctly," Margaret smiled. "You have yourself a good day, Dalton." Inside the bakery, Martha Henderson had a white bock already prepared. "Morning, Margaret. Dozen bear claws, 2 apple fritters, and I threw in some extra cinnamon rolls because Roy mentioned business has been good." "You're too generous, Martha." "Generosity is just good business with better intentions." Martha rang up the order, waving away Margaret's attempt to add a tip. "You tell Roy I expect him at church this Sunday. He's been dodging Pastor Richards for 3 weeks running." "I'll tell him, but you know Roy. He says he gets closer to God working Sunday brunch than sitting in a pew." Martha laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a summer breeze. That man could talk his way out of Judgment Day itself. "You drive safe now." Back in the truck, Margaret balanced the bakery box on the passenger seat and continued toward the diner. The morning ritual, the familiar faces, the comfortable rhythms of a small town where people still looked you in the eye and meant what they said. These were the things that made life worth living. At 76, she had survived the loss of her husband. She had survived the worry over a son who chose the open road over settling down. She had survived the small indignities of aging, the aching joints and the fading hearing, and the way young people sometimes look through you as if you were already a ghost. She had survived because she understood something fundamental. Life was built on these small moments, these brief connections, these morning exchanges that confirmed you were still here, still part of something larger than yourself. Roy's Diner occupied a corner lot on Main and 2nd, a classic railcar-style building with red vinyl booths, a long counter with chrome-edged stools, and a jukebox in the corner that still played if you hit it in just the right spot. Roy Pemberton had owned it for 32 years, having bought it from his father, who had bought it from the original owner in 1954. The continuity appealed to Margaret. In a world that seemed to change faster every year, Roy's Diner remained defiantly, comfortingly the same. She let herself in through the back door at 7:45, as quickly as she always did. Roy was already there prepping the grill, his shock of white hair tucked under a paper cap that had gone out of style in 1975. He looked up and grinned. "Morning, Maggie. Please tell me that's Martha's bear claws." "It is, and she says you need to be in church Sunday or face her wrath." Martha Henderson in full righteous fury. Roy made a show of shuddering. "That's more terrifying than any sermon." He accepted the bakery box, opening it to inhale deeply. "God bless that woman. Coffee's fresh. Help yourself." Margaret poured herself a cup from the industrial pot, adding nothing. She had learned to drink it black during her years as a yeoman, 3rd class in the Navy, typing duty rosters and discharge papers while Walter worked on jet engines at the Naval Air Station in Fallon. The coffee was strong enough to stand a spoon in. Exactly how she liked it. The morning prep work was familiar and soothing. Fill salt and pepper shakers. Check ketchup bottles. Wipe down menus. Fold napkins around silverware. Simple tasks, but they mattered. Details mattered. Walter used to say that about engine work. Get the details right, and the big things take care of themselves. By 8 o'clock, the early crowd had started trickling in. Ranchers grabbing breakfast before heading out to check fences. Retirees meeting for coffee and conversation. Margaret took orders, delivered plates, refilled coffee cups, and smiled at familiar faces. This was her congregation, Roy liked to say. These were her people. She knew their names. She knew their stories. She knew that old Bill Fredrickson took his eggs over easy with a side of heartburn complaints. She knew that the Sutherland twins always fought over the last piece of bacon. She knew that Vera Cosgrove came in every Wednesday, not because she was hungry, but because she was lonely. And Margaret always made sure to sit with her for 5 minutes during the slow stretch between breakfast and lunch. The morning rolled forward with comfortable predictability. The sun climbed higher. The jukebox played Patsy Cline, then Johnny Cash, then something by a singer Margaret didn't recognize, which meant one of the younger customers had put in a quarter. The coffee pot emptied and was refilled. Plates came out of the kitchen window and went back streaked with egg yolk and syrup. At 10:30, she was clearing table 6 when the diner's atmosphere changed. It was subtle at first, like a pressure drop before a storm. The conversations didn't stop, but they shifted, became quieter, more guarded. Forks paused between plate and mouth. Eyes darted toward the door. Margaret looked up. 4 young men walked through the entrance. She knew them, of course. In Copper Bluff, you knew everyone. Travis Kincaid led the pack. 32 years of privilege, wrapped in designer jeans and an entitled smirk. Behind him came Jason Vickers, Tyler Sutton, and Marcus Webb. 3 local men who had attached themselves to Travis like remoras to a shark feeding on the scraps of his father's power. They took the large booth in the back, the one usually reserved for bigger parties. Travis sprawled across the seat like he owned it. In a sense, he did. His father owned most things in Copper Bluff, one way or another. Margaret approached with her order pad and her professional smile. "Morning, boys. What can I get you?" Travis looked up at her, his eyes already showing the glaze of someone who had been drinking despite the early hour. The smell of whiskey clung to him like cheap cologne. Well, well, if it isn't Grandma Calloway." His voice carried across the diner, meant to be heard. "You still working here?" Thought Social Security would kicked in by now. Margaret kept her smile in place, though it required effort. Just earning my keep. What would you like to order? Tyler snickered from across the booth. Maybe you should get yourself a walker instead of carrying those heavy trays. Wouldn't want you breaking a hip. She felt the heat rise in her cheeks but kept her voice level. I'm doing just fine, thank you. Now, are you gentlemen ready to order? Or do you need a few more minutes? Gentlemen, Marcus repeated, drawing the word out mockingly. Did you hear that, boys? She called us gentlemen. 4 coffees, Travis said, waving his hand dismissively. And make sure they're hot this time. Last week you brought me lukewarm garbage. Margaret didn't remember serving him last week, but she nodded. 4 coffees coming up. She walked back to the counter, feeling the weight of the diner's attention. Everyone was watching now, waiting to see what would happen. She could see it in their faces. Sympathy mixed with relief that they weren't the targets. Fear, too, barely hidden. Fear of Travis Kincaid and, by extension, his father. She poured 4 cups of coffee, making sure they were hot as requested. Her hands were steady. 30 years of waitressing had taught her how to carry full cups without spilling a drop. She loaded them onto a tray and walked back to the booth, moving carefully between the tables. 4 coffees, she said, placing the tray on the edge of their table. Hot and fresh. She was reaching for the first cup when Travis's hand shot out and connected with her wrist. Not hard enough to hurt, but hard enough to throw off her balance. The tray tilted. Coffee sloshed over the rim of the cups. Hot liquid splashed across the table and onto Travis's lap. He jumped up, roaring. Jesus Christ, look what you did, you stupid old woman. I'm so sorry, Margaret stammered, grabbing napkins. I didn't mean to, You just poured scalding coffee all over me. Travis's face had gone red. He stepped closer, towering over her. You bumped my hand. Are you calling me a liar? Travis stepped closer, invading her space. She could smell the whiskey stronger now, mixed with something else. Anger, cruelty, the particular scent of a man who enjoyed watching someone smaller than him squirm. I'm not calling you anything, she said quietly. I apologize. Let me get you fresh coffee and a towel. A towel? Tyler laughed. Grandma Calloway thinks a towel is going to fix this. Maybe she's got dementia, Jason added, pulling out his phone. You know how old people get. Confused, can't hear right, can't think straight. He thumbed his phone's camera on. His smile was thin and predatory. Marcus had moved behind her without Margaret noticing. She became aware of his presence when his hands clamped down on her shoulders firm enough to prevent her from turning around. Hold still, Mrs. Calloway. His voice was cold and flat. We're just having a little fun. Let me go. She tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. Not painful. They were careful about that, but inescapable. Fear began to pulse through her veins, old and primal. Let me go right now. Travis reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small plastic container. The kind fishermen used for live bait. Through the clear lid, Margaret could see something moving inside. Something with too many legs. Its segmented body curling and uncurling in the dim light. You know what this is, Mrs. Calloway. Travis held the container up to her face close enough that she could see every segment, every twitching leg. This is a desert centipede. Beautiful creature. 6 inches long, venomous too. Not enough to kill you, but enough to make you wish you were dead. Please, her voice had gone thin and reedy with terror. Please don't. Please don't, Travis mimicked her tone with exaggerated frailty. But we're just trying to help. Jason here said you might not be hearing so well. We thought maybe this little guy could clean out your ears for you. Tyler was filming now, his phone held steady to capture everything. Margaret could see other customers pulling out their phones too, but not to help, to record, to post, to share. In the age of social media, witnessing had replaced intervention. Travis unscrewed the container's lid. The centipede reared in his palm, its venomous forcipules flexing. Margaret tried to jerk away, but Marcus held her fast. Please, she said again, hating the weakness in her voice, but unable to stop it. Please don't do this. Just hold still. Travis said, his voice taking on an almost soothing quality, which somehow made it worse. It'll only hurt for a minute. He brought the centipede toward her right ear. Margaret turned her head frantically, but Marcus grabbed her chin with one hand, forcing her to face forward. She felt the centipede's legs touching. Her skin felt Travis's fingers pushing it toward her ear canal. And then the pain began. The centipede bit her the moment it entered her ear, its venomous forcipules sinking into the delicate tissue of her ear canal. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, a white-hot spike that seemed to drive directly into her brain. She screamed, a sound she had never heard herself make before, raw and animal and desperate. Travis stepped back laughing. Tyler kept filming. Marcus finally released her and she fell to her knees, clawing at her ear, trying to get the creature out. She could feel it moving deeper, could hear its legs scraping against her eardrum. The pain was beyond anything she had ever experienced, beyond the kidney stones that had sent her to the hospital in 2015, beyond the time she had broken her wrist falling off a horse at age 12. This was something else entirely. This was violation. Roy finally emerged from behind the counter, his face pale. "Get out, all of you. Get the hell out of my diner." Travis turned to him, still grinning. "Or what, Roy? You going to call the sheriff? Go ahead. My father is the mayor. Sheriff Loomis works for him. Who do you think anyone's going to believe, us or some senile old waitress who probably put that bug in her own ear for attention?" "Get out," Roy repeated. But there was no force behind it. He knew just as everyone in the diner knew that Travis was right. Justice in Copper Bluff flowed from the mayor's office, and Mayor Victor Kincaid took care of his own. The four young men walked out, their laughter echoing even after the door swung shut. Tyler was still filming, narrating now. And that's how you deal with bad service in Copper Bluff. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Margaret remained on her knees, both hands pressed to her right ear, tears streaming down her face. The pain had subsided from unbearable to merely excruciating. She could feel blood trickling down her neck, warm and sticky. The centipede had finally stopped moving, either dead or satisfied with its new home. Roy knelt beside her, his hands hovering helplessly. "Maggie, we need to get you to the hospital. Can you stand?" She nodded, though standing seemed impossible. With Roy's help, she made it to her feet, swaying. The diner had gone completely silent. 40 or 50 people had witnessed what happened, and not one had intervened. She saw it in their faces. Shame, fear, relief that it wasn't them. She didn't blame them. She understood. In Copper Bluff, you learned when to speak and when to stay silent. Speaking up against the Kincaids came with a price most people couldn't afford to pay, but someone else could. Across town, in a different world that happened to occupy the same Nevada desert, Dean Calloway was elbow deep in a carburetor rebuild when his phone rang. The clubhouse of the Iron Brotherhood chapter sat 40 miles outside Copper Bluff, far enough to be separate, but close enough to matter. It wasn't the Hollywood version of a biker clubhouse. No drugs being counted on pool tables. No half-naked women draped across furniture. Instead, it looked more like a well-organized workshop crossed with a lodge hall. Tools hung on pegboards in precise order. Motorcycles in various states of repair occupied the main floor. A meeting table sat in the back, surrounded by chairs that had seen decades of use. An American flag hung on one wall, a Hells Angels banner on another. Photos of past members lined a third, including several marked with black ribbons. Brothers who had ridden their last mile. Dean had been working on a 1995 Heritage Softail for 3 hours, trying to coax better performance out of a carburetor that had seen better days. At 58, he had been wrenching on bikes for 40 years, had learned at his father's knee in the garage that Walter and Victor Kincaid once ran together. That memory still stung, how two friends could drift so far apart that they became strangers before death finally ended the arrangement. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He wiped his hands on a shop rag, leaving behind dark smears of oil and grease. The number on the screen was local, but not one he recognized. He almost let it go to voicemail, then changed his mind. Instinct, or maybe just habit. "Yeah, Dean." The voice was familiar. Roy Pemberton calling from the diner. "Dean, you need to come to town. It's about Margaret." Everything in Dean went still. Not frozen, still like a machine that had been running at full speed and suddenly shifted into neutral. All that energy redirected inward, waiting. "What happened to my mother?" Roy's voice cracked. "Travis Kincaid and his crew. Jesus, Dean, they put a centipede in her ear. Just for fun. Just to be cruel. She's hurt. She's scared. And she's..." Dean didn't remember ending the call. He stood in the middle of the garage, phone in hand, the rest of the world receding to a distant hum. Around him, other members of the chapter were working on their bikes. Ratchet McCready was rebuilding a transmission. Hammer Hawthorne was replacing fork seals. Deacon Callahan was reading a parts manual, his reading glasses perched on his weathered nose. Dean walked to the wall where Walter's picture hung one of dozens of photographs documenting the chapter's history. His father looked out from 1987, standing beside a shovelhead, tools in hand, that quiet half grin that always seemed to carry a secret worth keeping. Dean touched the frame, a gesture so quick the others might have missed it, but they didn't miss the change in his posture, the way his shoulders set, the way his jaw locked into something that wasn't anger yet, but was a close cousin to it. Ratchet, Hammer, Deacon. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute command. Gear up. We ride. Now. Ratchet looked up from the transmission. What's going on, boss? Dean turned to face them, and they saw something in his eyes that made them stand without asking further questions. They had ridden with Dean Calloway for years, had seen him calm and angry, patient and decisive. But this was different. This was the moment when a man decided that words were finished and action was required. Someone hurt my mother, Dean said simply, and they're about to learn what that means. He walked to his locker, pulling out his leather vest with the Hells Angels patches. President Iron Brotherhood Chapter Nevada. He had earned every patch through years of service, of standing up for brothers, of representing the club with honor even when civilians assumed the worst. He shrugged into the vest, checking the Colt 1911 in his shoulder holster. Legal, licensed, and maintained as carefully as his motorcycle. He had learned from his father that a man took care of his tools, his family, and his responsibilities. In that order. The other three were gearing up as well. Ratchet with his road-worn vest covered in pinback buttons from every state they had ridden through. Hammer in black leather from head to toe, his sergeant-at-arms patch marking him as the club's enforcer. Deacon with his secretary patch and the bearing of a man who had served in the Gulf War and came home with the kind of calm that only combat could forge. They walked out to their bikes together. 4 Harley-Davidsons sat in a row gleaming in the late morning sun. Dean's was a 2015 Road King, black with silver trim. 5 years old, but maintained as carefully as if it had rolled off the showroom floor yesterday. He had logged 60,000 miles on it. He knew every quirk of its engine, every particular vibration that meant something needed attention. He threw his leg over the bike, settling into the seat with the ease of long practice. Pushed the starter button. The V-twin engine roared to life, that distinctive Harley sound that was equal parts mechanical symphony and primal roar. Beside him, the other 3 bikes started in sequence, their engines forming a chorus. Dean didn't look back at the clubhouse. He didn't need to. Everything he needed was with him, his brothers, his bike, and a purpose that burned clean and cold in his chest. They rolled out onto Highway 50, bikes in tight formation, Dean in front, Ratchet to his right, Hammer and Deacon behind. The morning sun was climbing it toward noon now, painting the desert landscape in shades of gold and ochre. The highway stretched ahead, empty and waiting. The speedometer climbed to 70, then 80, fast enough to matter. Not so fast as to be reckless. A man in a hurry could still maintain discipline. Dean's mind was clear. No rage. Not yet. Rage was sloppy, made you do stupid things. Instead, he felt the cold clarity that came from purpose. Someone had hurt his mother. That someone would answer for it. The details could be worked out when he knew more, but the outcome was never in doubt. He thought about Margaret, 76 years old and still working because she said staying busy kept her young. He thought about her laugh, the way she had raised him alone after Walter died, the sacrifices she had made so he could have a decent life even when money was tight. He thought about her hands weathered from a lifetime of work, but always gentle when she had patched his scraped knees or hugged him after a nightmare. And he thought about the last thing his father had told him before the cancer finally won. They had been in the garage, Walter too weak to work, but insisting on supervising Dean's rebuild of a 1972 Ironhead. Walter had looked at him with eyes that were already seeing beyond this world and said, "Son's strength isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about protecting those who can't protect themselves. That's the only thing that makes a man worth a damn." Dean had lived by that principle for 40 years. He had joined the Hells Angels not for the outlaw mystique, but for the Brotherhood, for the code that said you stood by your own. He had become chapter president not through violence, but through steadiness. through being the man others could count on when things went sideways. He had built a reputation over decades with law enforcement, with other clubs, with the community, as someone who could be trusted to keep his word and stand his ground. And now someone had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The miles fell away beneath them. 30 minutes of highway, the landscape barely changing. This was desert country, beautiful in its starkness. Joshua trees stood like sentinels. The mountains rose in the distance, purple against the blue sky. Dean had ridden this road thousands of times, knew every curve and straightaway. It had never seemed longer than it did now. His phone rang twice during the ride, vibrating against his chest. He ignored it. Whatever it was could wait. Margaret couldn't. They passed the city limit sign for Copper Bluff at 12:25. Dean slowed the pack to 60, then 50, then 45 as they entered the residential streets. No need to announce their arrival with excessive noise. They weren't here to intimidate anyone but one person. Downtown Copper Bluff looked exactly as it always had, small, quiet, going about its business. A few people stopped to watch the four Harleys rumble past, but most didn't pay much attention. Bikers passed through Copper Bluff all the time, headed to Reno or Vegas or just riding for the sake of riding. Roy's Diner came into view. Dean could see a small crowd gathered outside, people talking in low voices. That particular body language of witnesses to something unpleasant, trying to process what they had seen. He pulled to the curb in front of the diner. The other three bikes formed up beside him. Killed the engine. Silence rushed in to fill the space left by the V-twins' roar. He dismounted, pulled off his gloves and tucked them in his belt. He was a big man, 6'3", 220 pounds, most of it still muscle despite his age. The leather vest added to his presence made him look even larger. His face was weathered from years of riding in sun and wind, a scar running from his left cheekbone to his jaw from a motorcycle accident at 25. His gray beard was trimmed close. His eyes were pale blue, the kind that seemed to look through you rather than at you. The crowd parted without being asked. Dean walked into the diner, his brothers following. The interior was familiar. He had eaten here 100 times over the years, had known Roy Pemberton since they were both young men finding their way. But it looked different now. Tables had been pushed aside, chairs were overturned, and in the back, in the doorway to the kitchen, he saw her. Margaret sat in a chair, Roy kneeling beside her. Her right ear was bandaged, blood soaking through the white gauze. Her uniform was stained with coffee and blood. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. But when she saw him, she tried to smile. "Dean, you didn't have to come all this way." He crossed the diner in 4 strides, dropping to one knee beside her. Gently, so gently, he touched her shoulder. "Mom, show me." She turned her head, revealing the full extent of the injury. The bandage covered her entire ear, blood still seeping through in places. The skin around it was swollen and discolored. He could see where tears had tracked through the powder on her cheeks. "Mom," his voice was barely a whisper. "Who did this? It's nothing, really, just some boys being stupid." "This is not nothing." He drew a slow breath through his nose, held it, let the anger settle into something colder and more useful. "Who did this to you?" Margaret looked at Roy, who nodded grimly. She sighed the sound of someone who knew fighting was useless. "Travis Kincaid and his friends, Jason Vickers, Tyler Sutton, Marcus Webb. They were drunk, looking for trouble. I was just in the way." Travis Kincaid. Dean tasted the name, felt it settle in his gut like a stone. Victor Kincaid's son. "Please don't make trouble," Margaret said quickly. "His father is the mayor. He has connections power." "I don't care if his father is the president of the United States. He hurt you. He's going to answer for that." "Dean, please. No violence. Your father wouldn't want..." "Dad taught me to protect family. That's exactly what I'm doing." He kissed her forehead gently. "But I'll do it right. I promise you that." He stood, turning to Roy. "Tell me everything." Roy did. Every detail from the moment Travis and his crew walked in until the moment they walked out, laughing. Dean listened without interrupting, his face impassive, but the other members of the Iron Brotherhood could see the tension building in his shoulders. The way his fingers flexed at his sides, tension coiling and releasing like a spring being tested. When Roy finished, Dean nodded slowly. Anyone get video? Roy hesitated, then gestured to a woman sitting in one of the booths. Sandra Novak, owner of the laundromat down the street. She looked terrified but determined. I did, she said quietly. On my phone, I was too scared to stop them, but I thought someone should have evidence. Can you send that to me? Dean pulled out his phone, gave her his number. 30 seconds later, his phone buzzed with an incoming file. He opened it, watched the entire horrific sequence. Travis holding up the centipede. Marcus restraining Margaret. The moment of violation. Her scream. He closed the video and pocketed his phone. When he looked up, his eyes were cold as winter. Mom, I need you to go home. Lock the doors and windows. Ratchet will follow you and stay outside your house. He turned to the shortest of his three companions, a wiry man with iron gray hair. Nobody gets near her, nobody. Got it, boss. Ratchet helped Margaret to her feet, supporting her gently. Margaret paused, looking at her son with the particular intensity of mothers who can read their children like books. Dean, please be careful. I will, Mom, I promise. He watched as Ratchet led her out to his bike, helped her onto the passenger seat, handed her a spare helmet. The bike's engine rumbled to life, and they pulled away, Margaret holding tight to Ratchet's waist. Dean turned back to Roy. Where do they hang out? Roy pulled out a napkin, scribbled an address. Rusty's Tavern, Highway 50, about 10 miles east. They're usually there most days, drinking and acting like lords of the manor. Dean took the napkin, memorized the address, and handed it back. Anyone else they've hurt? Roy's face darkened. More than I can count. Earl Granger had his welding shop vandalized 3 weeks ago. Spray paint, broken windows. He reported it. Nothing happened. Sandra's laundromat got the same treatment last month. Sheriff Loomis always finds a reason not to investigate. Says there's no evidence, or witnesses won't cooperate, or it's just kids being kids. Kids. Dean's laugh was bitter. Travis Kincaid is 32 years old. That's not a kid. That's a man who should know better. Should but doesn't, because his father's the mayor, and his father makes sure nothing touches him. Dean looked around the diner at all the faces watching him. They wanted him to do something. He could see it in their eyes. But they also expected him to fail, because everyone who tried to stand up to the Kincaids had failed. That was the way power worked in small towns. Not through overt tyranny, but through 1,000 small moments where people learn to stay quiet, stay safe, don't rock the boat. Thank you, Roy. Dean shook the old man's hand. I appreciate you calling me. What are you going to do? Dean smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I'm going to have a conversation, a polite one, and I'm going to give Travis Kincaid a chance to do the right thing. And if he doesn't, then I'll make sure everyone knows exactly who he is. Dean walked out of the diner. Hammer and Deacon fell in behind him. They mounted their bikes and synchronized motion engines, roaring to life in perfect harmony. The sound echoed off the buildings, a declaration and a warning. As they pulled away from the curb, Dean noticed something odd. A black Cadillac sedan parked across the street, engine running. A man in the driver's seat, not local. The plates were from out of state. The man was watching them, and when he saw Dean looking back, he raised a camera and took several photos. Dean memorized the plate number, filed it away for later consideration. Right now, he had more pressing concerns. They rode east on Highway 50, leaving Copper Bluff behind. The speedometer climbed to 85, fast enough to eat up distance, not so fast as to be reckless. Dean's mind was already several moves ahead, considering possibilities, planning contingencies. He wasn't going into this blind. The desert stretched around them, vast and indifferent. In the distance, he could see dust devils dancing across the hardpan, ancient whirlwinds that touched down and vanished according to their own unknowable logic. The sun was directly overhead, now burning down with that particular intensity that only high desert sun could achieve. Dean thought about Victor Kincaid, about the man who had once been his father's best friend, his business partner, his brother in all but blood. He thought about how power changed people, how it stripped away the parts that made them human and left only the hunger for more. He thought about his father's disappointment when the friendship ended, the way Walter would sometimes stare at old photos with an expression of loss deeper than mourning. And he thought about how the sins of fathers got visited on sons, how history had a way of repeating itself in smaller, meaner ways. Walter and Victor had broken their friendship over principles. Now their sons were going to collide over a centipede in an old woman's ear. If there was poetry in that, it was the dark kind. Rusty's Tavern appeared on the horizon. A low building with a gravel parking lot and a neon sign that probably hadn't worked since 1995. Half a dozen vehicles sat in the lot, including a lifted Ford F250 with custom rims and vanity plates that read Mayor's Son. Subtle, Dean thought. Real subtle. They pulled into the lot, parking in a line facing the entrance. Killed the engines. The sudden silence was profound, broken only by the ticking of cooling metal and the whisper of wind across the desert. Dean dismounted, pulled off his gloves. Hammer and Deacon flanked him. They didn't speak. Didn't need to. They had done this dance before in different places for different reasons. The choreography was familiar. Let Dean do the talking. Back him up. If things went sideways, don't escalate unless absolutely necessary. The door to Rusty's was propped open, probably a futile attempt to combat the heat. Country music drifted out. Something about trucks and beer and lost love. Dean walked inside. Let his eyes adjust to the dim interior. Pool table in the back, jukebox in the corner, neon beer signs providing most of the illumination. The smell of old beer and older tobacco. And at the pool table, 4 young men lined up shots and laughed too loud about nothing in particular. Dean walked straight toward them, his boots echoing on the scarred wooden floor. Conversations died as he passed. The bartender, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, started to say something, then thought better of it. Travis Kincaid was lining up a shot when Dean's shadow fell across the table. He looked up, annoyance flickering across his face. "Who the hell are you, old man?" Dean stopped 3 feet away, close enough to be in Travis's space, but not so close as to be overtly threatening. "We need to talk about what you did this morning." Travis straightened cue stick still in hand. Recognition dawned slowly. "Oh, I know who you are. You're the biker trash, Grandma Calloway's son." "I'm the son of the woman you assaulted." "Assaulted!" Travis laughed, looking at his friends for support. They laughed too on cue. "That's a strong word for a little joke. You put a venomous centipede in my 76-year-old mother's ear while your friend held her down and another one filmed it." Dean's voice remained level, conversational even. "That's not a joke. That's assault, battery, elder abuse, probably qualifies as a hate crime." "A hate crime?" Tyler pushed off from the wall where he had been leaning. "Against what old people? Against someone who couldn't defend herself. Which makes you not just criminals, but cowards." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Travis's face flushed red. "You want to repeat that?" "I'm not here to repeat anything. I'm here to give you a chance to do the right thing." Dean pulled out his phone, pulled up the video Sandra had sent him. "This is video evidence of what you did. Clear as day. Shows your face, your friends' faces, shows the assault from start to finish." He held up the phone so Travis could see the screen. Watched the young man's face go from red to pale as he recognized himself. Recognized the moment he had crossed the line. That's private property. You can't. This was taken in a public place by a witness. It's perfectly legal evidence." Dean pocketed the phone. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to come with me to your father's office. You're going to confess what you did. You're going to apologize to my mother in person. You're going to pay her medical bills. And you're going to turn yourself in to Sheriff Loomis." Travis stared at him for a long moment, then burst out laughing. "Are you kidding me? You think I'm going to do any of that?" "It's the right thing to do." "The right thing?" Travis's laugh had an edge to it now. "Old man, do you have any idea who I am, who my father is?" "I know exactly who you are and who your father is. It doesn't change what you did. It changes everything." Travis stepped closer, jabbing the pool cue toward Dean's chest without quite touching him. "My father is Mayor Victor Kincaid. He runs this county. Sheriff Loomis works for him. The judges work for him. Half the state legislature is in his pocket. You think some video is going to change that? I think the truth matters. The truth is what my father says it is. And right now, the truth is that some senile old waitress probably put that bug in her own ear for attention. Or maybe she's just confused. Old people get confused, right?" Dean felt his jaw tighten. He held the anger steady, turned it into fuel instead of fire. "Last chance, Travis. Come with me now. Do the right thing. or I promise you this video goes everywhere. Every news station, every social media platform. Everyone will know exactly what you did. And who's going to believe some biker trash over the mayor's son? Travis's confidence was backed by the certainty that he was untouchable. You make any trouble for me, my father will destroy you. He'll have you arrested. He'll shut down your little clubhouse. He'll make your life a living hell. Is that your answer? That's my answer. Now get out of my bar before I call the sheriff and have you arrested for harassment. Dean nodded slowly. Okay, I tried it your way. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Travis, you should know I've faced worse than small-town mayors. You and your father are about to find out what that means. He was 2 steps away when Jason Vickers pulled a gun. It happened fast. Jason had been standing off to the side, mostly quiet during the entire exchange. Now he stepped forward, a Glock 19 in his hand, the barrel pointing somewhere in the general direction of Dean's center mass. Don't move, biker. Jason's voice was high, scared. His hand shook slightly. All of you, back against the wall. The bar went completely silent. Even the jukebox seemed to sense the moment, ending one song without starting another. Dean didn't move. Hammer and Deacon had gone very still behind him. 3 decades of Brotherhood had taught them to read situations, to know when to act and when to wait. Put the gun down, kid. Dean's voice was calm, almost gentle. Nobody needs to get hurt. Shut up, just shut up. Jason's finger was on the trigger, which was a problem. The Glock's trigger safety was the only thing between everyone in the room and a very bad situation. And then Deacon moved. It wasn't dramatic, it was efficient. One moment Deacon was standing 5 feet behind Dean. The next moment he was beside Jason, his hand closing over the Glock's slide. He racked it back hard, ejecting the chambered round, then pressed the magazine release. The magazine clattered to the floor. He pulled the slide completely off the frame, disassembling the gun in Jason's hands in less than 2 seconds. He handed the pieces back to Jason one by one. Frame, slide, magazine. The ejected round last. Safety was off, kid. Deacon's voice carried the weight of someone who had seen actual combat, who had been shot at by people who meant it. You would have shot yourself, or someone else, or both. Learn to handle a weapon before you point it at a man. And for God's sake, keep your booger hook off the bang switch until you're ready to fire. Jason stood there holding the disassembled parts of his Glock, face pale with shock. Dean turned back to Travis. This is your last warning. Walk away from this. Do the right thing. Because next time I come back, I won't be this polite. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. Travis's voice shook with rage and humiliation. My father will destroy you, all of you. You have no idea what you just started. Yes, Dean said quietly. I do. They walked out of Rusty's Tavern in the same formation they had entered. Behind them, they could hear Travis already on his phone, no doubt calling his father. Dean expected that. In fact, he was counting on it. They mounted their bikes, started the engines. The V-twin roar seemed louder now, more aggressive. Or maybe that was just Dean's perception, colored by adrenaline and the certainty that a line had been crossed. As they rode back toward Copper Bluff, the afternoon sun angling toward the western mountains, Dean's mind was already moving to the next phase. He had given Travis a chance to do the right thing. Travis had refused. Now it was time to take this public, to force the issue where neither the Kincaid money nor influence could bury it. But first he needed to make some calls. People who owed him favors. People who understood that sometimes the system needed a push in the right direction. His phone buzzed as they hit the outskirts of Copper Bluff. He answered without slowing. Yeah, it's Ratchet. Your mom won't stay put. Dean felt his stomach tighten. What do you mean? I mean, she told me to wait outside, then she went out the back door. I followed her. She's at Earl Granger's welding shop right now, talking to him, taking notes. Dean was quiet for a moment. Then, despite everything, he almost smiled. Taking notes. She's got a little notebook. She's writing everything down. Earl's showing her his security footage. She said, and I'm quoting here, "My son needs evidence, not muscle. Somebody's got to do the thinking around here." Dean shook his head. 76 years old. A centipede had been shoved into her ear 3 hours ago, and she was already working the case. Stay with her. Don't let her out of your sight. Boss, I don't think she needs me. I think she needs a secretary. Dean ended the call and looked over at Hammer riding beside him. His sergeant-at-arms raised an eyebrow. My mother, Dean shouted over the wind and engines, is interviewing witnesses. Hammer grinned. The kind of grin that said he wasn't surprised at all. And somewhere in Copper Bluff, in a blue metal building that smelled of welding flux and honest work, Margaret Calloway sat across from Earl Granger with her little notebook open and her reading glasses perched on her nose, the bandage on her ear still spotted with blood, and asked the question that would begin the unraveling of Victor Kincaid's empire. Tell me everything, Earl, from the beginning. Don't leave anything out. Because Margaret Calloway had learned something in 76 years that Travis Kincaid and his father had never understood. You didn't need fists to fight. You didn't need guns or money or political connections. You needed the truth. And you needed someone stubborn enough to find it. She was that someone. She had always been that someone. And now, with her ears still throbbing and her heart still racing and her hands still shaking from what those boys had done to her, she was going to prove it. Earl Granger's welding shop smelled the way it always had of scorched metal and cutting oil, and the particular mineral tang of arc welding that never quite left the air. Margaret sat on an overturned milk crate, her notebook balanced on her knee, writing in the careful cursive she had learned in Catholic school 60 years ago. The handwriting was slower now, the letters slightly larger to accommodate eyes that weren't what they used to be, but every word was legible, every detail precise. Earl stood at his workbench, leaning against it the way men of a certain age leaned against things when standing became a negotiation with gravity. He was 72, white-haired, hands like leather gloves that had been left in the sun too long. 22 years in the Navy and then 50 years of metalwork had given him the posture of a man who had earned every ache in his body. 3 weeks ago, Earl said, staring at a spot on the wall, Monday morning, I came in at 6 like always. Door was standing open. They'd pried it with a crowbar. You could see the marks on the frame. Margaret wrote door forced, crowbar marks, Monday, 3 weeks prior. Spray paint all over the walls. Words I won't repeat to you, Maggie. Tools scattered everywhere. They'd taken a sledgehammer to my welding tanks. Didn't rupture them, thank God, but dented them good. Cost me $2,000 in damages in a week of cleanup. You reported it? Of course I did. Called Sheriff Loomis that morning. He came out, took some photos, wrote up a report, said he'd investigate. Earl's laugh carried no humor. You know what came of that investigation? Nothing. Not a damn thing. Week later, I called to follow up. Sheriff said there wasn't enough evidence to pursue charges. Said it was probably just kids being stupid. But you knew who did it. I knew. Earl walked to a filing cabinet, pulled out a folder, and handed it to her. My security camera caught them. Not perfect footage. The angle's not great, and they were wearing hoodies. But you can see enough. See that tattoo on the wrist? That's Travis Kincaid. I'd stake my life on it. Margaret opened the folder. Security camera stills grainy, but clear enough. 4 figures in hoodies' faces partially obscured, spray painting the walls. One of them had his sleeve pulled back slightly, revealing a tattoo on his inner wrist. A geometric pattern, almost like a brand. I showed this to Loomis, Earl continued. He looked at it for about 5 seconds and said it wasn't conclusive enough for an arrest warrant. Said lots of people have tattoos. Said I'd need more evidence. He took the folder back. That's when I knew the fix was in. Sheriff's not going to move against the mayor's son. Not now, not ever. Why didn't you call Dean? Earl met her eyes. Because I'm a foolish old man who still believed the law worked in this town. I thought if I followed the rules played by their system, justice would happen. He shook his head. I spent 22 years in the Navy, Maggie. I helped build the ships that kept this country safe. I came home and started this business from nothing. And now I'm scared of my own shop because some punk kid knows his daddy will protect him. Margaret wrote it all down. The tattoo, the dismissal, the sheriff's refusal. Then she looked up at Earl with eyes that were red from crying and sharp from purpose. Can I borrow those photos? I'll bring them back. You can have them. I made copies. Earl studied her, his expression caught between admiration and concern. Maggie, what are you doing? You should be in the hospital. You should be resting. I should be a lot of things. She closed her notebook and tucked it into her apron pocket. Right now, I need to be useful. My son is angry enough to do something reckless. If I can put enough evidence together, maybe he won't have to. Your boy's a good man. Reminds me of Walter. He is Walter. That's what worries me. Walter never knew when to stop fighting. Neither does Dean. She stood carefully, feeling the world tilt slightly before steadying. The pain medication Roy had given her at the diner was wearing off, and her ear had begun to throb again, a deep, persistent pulse that seemed to originate somewhere behind her right eye. She touched the bandage gently. It was damp, still bleeding. Ratchet was waiting outside, sitting on his Harley with the particular patience of a man who had been told to guard something and intended to do exactly that. Where to next, Mrs. Calloway? Sandra Novak's laundromat. You sure you shouldn't go home? Your boy said, my boy is not the boss of me. He may be president of whatever club he runs, but I changed his diapers. Drive. Ratchet, to his credit, did not argue further. Sandra Novak's laundromat sat between a thrift store and a closed-down insurance office on the east end of Main Street. The sign out front read, Novak's Clean and Fold, in letters that had once been bright blue and were now the faded color of old denim. Margaret walked in to find Sandra folding towels with the mechanical precision of someone trying to lose herself in routine work. Sandra looked up. Recognition followed quickly by something Margaret had seen too many times today. Fear. Mrs. Calloway, I heard what happened. I'm so sorry. How is your... It hurts, Margaret said simply, but I'm here because I think the same people who hurt me hurt you too, and I think it's time someone started writing it all down. Sandra set down the towel she had been folding. Her hands were trembling. What good is writing it down? What good is any of it when nothing ever changes? Nothing changes because nobody connects the dots. One incident is an incident. Two incidents is a pattern is evidence. And evidence is the only thing that scares men like Victor Kincaid. Sandra stared at her for a long moment. Then she pulled a stool from behind the counter and sat down. 6 weeks ago, she began. Early morning, I arrived to find both front windows smashed, glass everywhere, graffiti on the walls, half my washers damaged, coins stolen from the machines. $5,000 in damages, not counting lost business while repairs were made. Margaret wrote, windows, graffiti, machines damaged, 5,000. 6 weeks ago. Travis and his friends had been in here the week before, drunk, making comments, touching things they had no business touching. When I asked them to leave, Travis said I'd regret it. 3 days later, this happened. And Sheriff Loomis? Sandra's laugh was brittle. Took a report, said he'd investigate, called me a week later to say there wasn't sufficient evidence to pursue charges. Said I should upgrade my security system. Maybe install cameras. She gestured around the laundromat. You see any cameras here? I can barely afford to keep the lights on. Where am I supposed to get money for cameras? Margaret reached across and squeezed Sandra's hand. It was a gesture she had perfected over decades of waitressing, a brief contact that said more than words. I see you, I hear you, you are not alone. Can you write down everything you remember times what they said, what was damaged, what the sheriff said when you reported it? I can do better than that. Sandra reached under the counter and pulled out a manila folder. I kept everything. The police report, the repair estimates, photos I took before Loomis arrived, even a recording on my phone of Travis threatening me the week before. Margaret took the folder with the reverence of a woman who understood its weight. This is exactly what we need, Bipam. For what can we actually do with it? I don't know yet, but I know this much. I know that when you gather enough truth in one place, it becomes very hard for people to pretend it doesn't exist. Her next stop was one she hadn't planned. As Ratchet drove her back through town, she saw a light on in the Copper Bluff Community Center, the library section, and through the window she recognized a figure she had known for over 40 years. Stop here, she told Ratchet. Dorothy Hale was in the library section reshelving books with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had spent 4 decades commanding classrooms full of unruly teenagers. She looked up when Margaret walked in, and her expression cycled through surprise, concern, and something else, something that looked very much like relief. Margaret Calloway, sit down before you fall down. Dorothy pulled out a chair. I heard what happened. The whole town's heard. Dorothy, I need your help. What kind of help? The kind that requires someone who knows where the bodies are buried, figuratively speaking. Dorothy studied her for a long moment. Then she stood, walked to the back office, and closed the door behind them. From beneath a table, she pulled out a banker's box. I've been waiting for someone to care enough to come looking, Dorothy said. She opened the box. Inside were newspaper clippings, printed articles, handwritten, notes, official documents. I've been documenting things for 3 years, ever since I realized what was happening to this town. Margaret looked at the contents of them and felt something shift inside her chest. Not surprise exactly, more like confirmation, the feeling of a puzzle piece clicking into place. Mayor Kincaid has been in office for 8 years, Dorothy said, laying items on the table one by one. In that time, 17 small businesses have closed, not because of economics, because of pressure. The owners who refused to sell their properties to Silverpine Development found themselves facing sudden permit problems. Health code violations that didn't exist before, increased fees and taxes. Silverpine Development, LLC registered in Delaware, ownership hidden behind shell companies. Dorothy pulled out several pages of corporate filings. But I did some digging. Look at the original articles of incorporation from 2016. Right there, the initial board of directors. Margaret scanned the list. Victor Kincaid, Sheriff Bert Loomis. Travis Kincaid listed as treasurer, even though he would have been only 24 at the time. They've been running a scam for 8 years, Dorothy said. Buy properties cheap from people under duress. Flip them to developers for huge profits. And anyone who won't sell gets squeezed until they have no choice. Margaret sat very still. The pain in her ear had become a distant thing pushed aside by something stronger. The particular feeling of understanding something terrible for the first time. It's not just corrupt Margaret, it's organized crime. How has this not been investigated? Who's going to investigate? The sheriff's on the board. The county attorney is Kincaid's golf buddy. The state investigators have to be invited in, and the mayor controls those invitations. Dorothy pulled out another document. Her hands were steady, but her voice dropped. 6 years ago, a man named Frank Jessup tried to stop a Silverpine development project. He organized community opposition, filed complaints, threatened lawsuits. She paused. 1 month later, his house burned down. With him inside, fire marshal ruled it accidental. Margaret's hand stopped writing. You don't think it was? Frank sent me an email the week before he died. Dorothy retrieved a printed email from the box. Read it yourself. The email was dated May 3rd, 2018. The message was brief. Dorothy, if anything happens to me, look into Kincaid. He came to my house last night. Said I was making things difficult for everyone. Said accidents happen when people don't know when to stop. I'm scared. I'm documenting everything, leaving copies with my lawyer. But if something happens, you need to know. 1 week later, Frank Jessup was dead. Margaret read the email twice. Her hands were shaking, but not from the pain medication wearing off. She thought about the diner that morning, about Travis Kincaid's hand on her wrist, about the centipede entering her ear, about the pain. And she realized that what had happened to her was not random cruelty. It was the latest expression of a system designed to keep people afraid. A system that had killed a man for speaking up. Why didn't you take this to the state police? I tried 3 years ago, drove to Reno, met with investigators. They took my statement, said they'd look into it. I've heard nothing since. Either the investigation was buried or someone made it go away. Margaret carefully closed the notebook. She looked at Dorothy across the table, 2 women in their 70s, sitting in a back office, surrounded by evidence of crimes that had been invisible because everyone was too afraid to look. I need copies of everything, Margaret said. Already done. Dorothy pulled out a second box identical to the first. This is yours. I've been waiting for someone to care enough to do something. I just never thought it would be you. Why not me? Because you're a waitress, Margaret. Because you're 76 years old. Because your son is a biker and his father and Victor Kincaid were friends once. Were, past tense. And being a waitress means I've spent 30 years listening to people. I know this town better than Victor Kincaid ever will. I know who's been hurt. I know who's afraid. And I know who's ready to talk if someone just asks. Dorothy's face softened into something that might have been admiration. Walter Calloway married the right woman. He did. Now help me carry this box to the parking lot. My escort is waiting. Margaret emerged from the community center carrying a banker's box full of evidence, her notebook full of testimony, and a clarity of purpose that burned through the pain like sunlight through fog. Ratchet took one look at the box and raised his eyebrows. Do I want to know? You want to take me home now. My son will be there soon, and he's going to need everything in this box. Dean was indeed waiting at the house on Pinewood Drive when they arrived. He was sitting on the porch steps, Hammer and Deacon flanking them, his face carrying the controlled tension of a man who had spent the afternoon confronting predators and was now recalibrating. He stood when Margaret's escort pulled up. His eyes went to the box first, then to his mother's face. Ratchet told me you went interviewing witnesses. Someone had to. Margaret handed him the box. Earl Granger's security footage, Sandra Novak's police reports and repair estimates, and 3 years of documentation from Dorothy Hale proving that Victor Kincaid has been running a criminal enterprise through Silverpine Development. Dean opened the box, looked through the contents. His expression shifted from surprise to something deeper, something that looked very much like pride. Mom, this is what your lawyer will need to build a federal case. I assume you've called one. He stared at her. How did you know I was calling a lawyer? Because you're your father's son. Walter always said, hit them with truth before you hit them with anything else. You confronted Travis. Travis refused. So now you need the law. And for the law to work, you need evidence. She tapped the box. There's your evidence. Dean sat down on the porch steps, opened the box again, read Dorothy's notes, studied Earl's photographs, reviewed Sandra's documentation. When he found Frank Jessup's email, he read it 3 times and Margaret watched something harden behind his eyes. They killed a man, he said quietly. It looks that way. And covered it up. For 6 years, Dean pulled out his phone. I need to make some calls. I know you do. Go inside, use the kitchen table. I'll make coffee. For the next 3 hours, Margaret's kitchen became a war room. Dean called Nathan Aldridge, a former federal prosecutor in Reno, who owed him favors from a previous life he never spoke about. He called Rachel Dunbar, a DEA regional director who had worked with Dean years ago during an undercover operation that remained sealed in federal records. He organized the evidence Margaret had gathered, cross-referenced it with what he already knew, and began building the framework for a federal case. Margaret kept the coffee flowing. She answered Dean's questions about the town, about who had been affected by Silverpine's operations, about the timeline of closures and acquisitions. She knew these things not because she was an investigator, but because she was a waitress in a small-town diner. She had heard every complaint, witnessed every foreclosure, served coffee to every broken business owner who came to Roy's to stare into their cups and wonder what went wrong. At 8 o'clock that evening, Dean looked up from his phone. Nathan Aldridge is driving down first thing tomorrow. He wants formal statements from everyone. Earl, Sandra, Dorothy, Roy, you. Me. You're the victim of the most recent assault, and you're the one who connected all the pieces. He paused. Mom, what you did today, going out there while you were hurt, talking to people, gathering evidence. It's the bravest thing I've seen anyone do in a long time. It wasn't brave, it was practical. You needed ammunition. I got you ammunition. You could have been hurt worse. If Travis had found out you were collecting evidence, Travis Kincaid doesn't notice waitresses. That's his weakness. People like him never look at the people who serve them. They don't see us as threats because they don't see us at all. She poured him another cup of coffee. That's why I could do what I did today, because I'm invisible to them. A 76-year-old woman with a bandaged ear and a coffee pot. Nothing to worry about. Dean shook his head slowly. Dad always said you were the dangerous one in the family. Your father was a smart man. The phone rang. Dean answered, his face immediately shifting into the mask of controlled authority that Margaret recognized as his president face. Yeah, he listened. His jaw tightened. When? More listening. How many? His eyes found Margaret's across the kitchen table. Understood. Double the guard. Nobody moves without an escort. He ended the call. That was Ratchet. There's been activity around the house. A black sedan drove past 3 times in the last hour, slowing down each time. Margaret felt the fear return, cold and liquid in her stomach, but she kept her voice steady. Victor's people, maybe, could be a private investigator, could be nothing. But we're not taking chances. He began pacing. I've got brothers coming in from 2 other chapters. By tomorrow morning, we'll have 20 people here. But tonight we stay together, Margaret finished. I'll make up the spare room. I'll be on the couch. Hammer and Deacon are outside. Margaret nodded. She had learned long ago that arguing with Dean about protection was pointless. He had inherited his father's stubbornness, along with his principles. She was washing the coffee cups when the phone rang again. This time it was a number she didn't recognize. Dean answered on speaker. Mr. Calloway. The voice was polished, professional. This is County Attorney Mitchell Pearson. I'm calling on behalf of Mayor Kincaid. Dean's expression didn't change. I'm listening. The mayor wanted me to convey his concern about the incident involving your mother. He's deeply troubled by his son's behavior and wants to resolve this situation amicably. Amicably? Yes, the mayor is prepared to offer compensation for your mother's medical expenses. Additionally, Travis will be entering a treatment program for his substance abuse issues. All charges will be dropped, and we can move forward without further conflict. In exchange for what? In exchange for your agreement not to pursue this matter further. No press, no lawsuits, no public statements. A quiet resolution that serves everyone's interests. Margaret caught Dean's eye across the kitchen. She shook her head. Once. Firmly. Dean didn't hesitate. Tell the mayor no. Tell him his son is going to face justice. Tell him his corruption is going to be exposed. And tell him that trying to buy me off just proves everything I suspected about him. Mr. Calloway, I urge you to reconsider. The mayor has considerable resources and influence. Making an enemy of him would be... He made an enemy of me when his son tortured my 76-year-old mother. We're done talking. Dean ended the call. 5 minutes later, his phone rang again. Sheriff Burt Loomis. Dean, don't hang up. I'm calling as a courtesy. Some courtesy. Listen to me. I know what you're planning. I know you think you're doing the right thing. But you need to understand you can't win this. Kincaid owns this county. You push him, he'll push back harder. He'll have you arrested. He'll shut down your clubhouse. He'll make your life hell. He can try. God damn it, Dean. I'm trying to help you. You want to help me do your job. Arrest Travis Kincaid. Investigate Silverpine development. Be the sheriff this county needs instead of Kincaid's lapdog. It's not that simple. Yes, it is. You just choose comfort over courage. Every single day you make that choice. Dean paused. But it's not too late, Bert. You could cooperate. Tell the truth about Silverpine, about the investigations you buried, about Frank Jessup. The silence stretched. Margaret could hear the sheriff breathing on the other end. I can't, Loomis finally said. You don't understand what he has on me. I understand you have a choice. Same choice you've had for 8 years. The call ended. Dean sat in the silence of the kitchen staring at the phone. Margaret placed a fresh cup of coffee in front of him. He's afraid, she said. He should be. Not of Victor, of what happens when this all comes out, of facing what he's done. That's not my problem. It might be your opportunity. Margaret sat across from him. If Loomis cooperates, it strengthens the case. He knows everything. He won't cooperate. He's too deep. People surprise you, Dean. I've been pouring coffee for 30 years. I've seen men at their worst and their best sometimes in the same breakfast. Loomis isn't evil. He's weak. And weak men can be turned if you give them a reason. Dean looked at her with an expression she recognized. The look Walter used to give her when she said something he hadn't considered, but knew was right. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. Stop now or Margaret won't be safe. Dean stared at the message. Margaret watched his face cycle through emotions like a storm moving across open desert. Anger, fear, and then something harder. Resolve. He forwarded the message to Rachel Dunbar, added a note. Witness intimidation. Add it to the charges. Then he called Ratchet. Double the guard on this house. No one gets near her. No one. Already done, boss. We've got 4 brothers here now. She's safe. Margaret watched her son pace the kitchen, his boots heavy on the old linoleum. She thought about Walter, about the nights he had come home from the garage, grease under his nails and worry in his eyes because some deal had gone wrong or some part hadn't arrived. He would pace just like this, back and forth, working through the problem with his body because his mind needed the movement. Dean, he stopped. Come sit down. He sat. You've done everything you can do tonight. The lawyer's coming tomorrow. The federal agent is building her case. The evidence is gathered. The witnesses are ready. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Now you rest, because tomorrow is going to be the longest day of your life. I can't rest, not when they're threatening you. They've been threatening people in this town for 8 years. One more night won't change anything, but you being exhausted tomorrow could change everything for the worse. He knew she was right. He always knew when she was right, even when he didn't want to admit it. I'll take the couch, he said. The spare room is made up. Couch is closer to the front door. She didn't argue. Some battles weren't worth fighting. Margaret went to bed at 10 o'clock, lying in the dark and listening to the familiar sounds of the house. The furnace clicking on, the refrigerator humming, and underneath it all, the low rumble of Harley engines outside her window, brothers, circling the block, keeping watch through the darkness. She reached over and touched the photograph on the nightstand. Walter looking back at her from 2018, that knowing smile. Your boy is just like you, she whispered. Stubborn and righteous and too brave for his own good. But we raised him right, Walter. We raised him to stand up. She paused, listening to the engines. I did something today. I went out and gathered evidence, talked to people, put the pieces together. You would have laughed at me, an old woman with a notebook playing detective with a bandage on her ear. But it felt right. It felt like the thing that needed doing. She closed her eyes. I hope you are watching. I hope you are proud. She closed her eyes, but sleep did not come easily. Downstairs, she could hear Dean on the phone, his voice low and controlled, making call after call, organizing, mobilizing, doing what he did best, which was leading men through uncertain terrain. At the Iron Brotherhood clubhouse 40 miles outside town, something extraordinary was happening. Ratchet had made calls, and those calls had generated more calls, and by 9 o'clock that evening, 23 bikers from 3 different chapters had gathered in the meeting room. They sat at the long table arranged by chapter and rank. The room smelled of leather and motor oil, and the particular musk of men who lived hard lives outdoors. Dean had ridden out to address them in person. Hammer on his right, Deacon on his left. Brothers, Dean began, you've heard what happened to my mother. What you might not know is that this is bigger than one assault. This is about a corrupt mayor who's been squeezing this town for 8 years. It's about good people being too scared to stand up because they know the system is rigged against them. He told them everything. Earl's vandalized shop, Sandra's broken windows, Frank Jessup's suspicious death, the documentation Dorothy had compiled, the federal investigation Rachel Dunbar was opening. Here's what I need from you. Tomorrow morning, we're having a meeting at this clubhouse. Nathan Aldridge, a former federal prosecutor, is coming to take statements. We're building a case. I need volunteers to help protect the witnesses, to make sure no one gets intimidated or threatened. I need people to spread the word that we're standing up, that anyone else who's been hurt by the Kincaids can come forward safely. One of the visiting chapter presidents spoke up. Boss, with respect, this sounds like you're poking a hornet's nest. What happens when Kincaid pushes back? Then we push harder. He's got the local law on his side. We've got federal law on ours. Another voice from the back. What about Travis? That punk's going to come looking for payback. Let him. We document everything, every threat, every action, every contact. It all goes into the federal case. The room murmured, brothers talking among themselves. Dean waited, letting them process, letting them decide. The Hells Angels weren't a dictatorship despite what civilians thought. Important decisions required consensus, required brothers to buy in willingly. Finally, Ratchet spoke up. I'm in. They hurt Margaret. That's enough for me. In, said Hammer. In, said Deacon. Around the room, one by one, every man present voiced agreement. Some of them had never met Margaret. Some of them had never been to Copper Bluff. But that was the point of Brotherhood. When one was threatened, all stood together. All right, Dean said. Thank you. Tonight we protect our own. Half of you are on security detail. rotating shifts watching Margaret's house, Earl's shop, Sandra's laundromat. The other half get rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. The meeting broke up. Brothers dispersed to their assignments. Dean rode back to Pinewood Drive through the desert darkness, the stars blazing overhead. His father had taught him that a man who can't fix his own ride doesn't deserve to call himself a biker. But the lesson was deeper than mechanics. It was about self-reliance, about not depending on others to solve your problems. Margaret heard him come in downstairs, heard the familiar sounds of a man settling onto a couch that was too short for his frame, heard his breathing slow as exhaustion finally won its argument with vigilance. She allowed herself to relax. Her son was downstairs. His brothers were outside. The law was coming tomorrow. For the first time since 10:30 that morning, when Travis Kincaid had walked through the diner door and changed everything, Margaret felt something like safety. She slept. And in her sleep, she dreamed of Walter. Standing in the garage, young and strong, covered in grease, smiling that knowing smile. In the dream, he spoke. "You're doing the right thing, Maggie. Stay the course." She woke before the alarm. 5:15. The house was quiet. She dressed in silence. Not her uniform today. Slacks, a blouse, sensible walking shoes. She had the meeting with Aldridge this morning. The diner this afternoon. By 6:30, she had made breakfast for Dean and the two brothers who had been standing watch outside. Eggs, bacon, toast, coffee. She served it without ceremony, the way she had served meals for 50 years. Fuel for the body, comfort for the soul. The morning meeting at the clubhouse went as planned. Nathan Aldridge arrived at 7:45 in his gunmetal gray Mercedes. Margaret rode with Ratchet, arriving at 8:30 in her navy dress. She walked into a room full of bikers and witnesses and a lawyer in an expensive suit, and she took a seat at the head of the table with a bearing that made every person in the room straighten unconsciously. Aldridge recorded each testimony with methodical precision. Earl described the vandalism and showed his security footage. Sandra recounted the destruction, producing receipts. Dorothy walked through 8 years of Silverpine documentation. Roy testified about the assault he had witnessed, and then Margaret spoke. She told it all, in order, in detail. When she reached the moment Travis held up the Centipede, her voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but she didn't stop. She described the hands on her shoulders, the whiskey breath, the creature's legs, the pain. The room was silent when she finished. "Mrs. Calloway," Aldridge said, "that was the most compelling witness testimony I've heard in 30 years of law. I'm just telling what happened." By noon, they had 6 formal statements, all recorded and notarized. Aldridge confirmed that Rachel Dunbar R. could have warrants ready by the following morning. Federal agents would execute them simultaneously at 4 locations. After the meeting, Margaret insisted on going to the diner. She changed into her uniform in Roy's back room and stepped out to the counter as if it were any other afternoon. Hammer positioned himself at a booth near the door. She poured coffee, took orders, smiled at familiar faces. She was Margaret Calloway, and this was where she belonged, and the world could keep spinning outside the windows while she did her job. At 4:30, the atmosphere shifted. Through the front window, she saw Travis Kincaid's lifted F250 pull up outside Sandra Novak's laundromat across the street. Travis climbed out, followed by his 3 companions. They were drunk, aggressive, looking for the kind of trouble that made them feel powerful. Margaret put down her coffee pot, took off her apron, walked toward the door. "Mrs. Calloway," Hammer said, standing. "Where are you going?" "Across the street." Dean said no confrontations. Dean said a lot of things. He also said to keep people safe. Sandra's across the street, and those boys are at her door. She walked out of the diner and across Main Street with the unhurried pace of a woman who had spent 76 years learning that panic never solved anything. Behind her, Hammer's boots hit the pavement. She heard him making a call. By the time she reached the laundromat, Travis was standing in the doorway blocking it. Inside, Sandra and 2 customers stood frozen with fear. Travis was shouting about testimony and burning things to the ground. "Travis Kincaid," Margaret said. He turned, surprise, annoyance, then a grin that showed too many teeth. "Well, look who it is. Grandma Calloway. How's the ear still ringing? Step away from that door. Or what? You going to waitress me to death? I'm going to stand right here until you leave." And every person on this street is going to see you threatening a business owner in broad daylight. And every one of them is going to remember it when the time comes to testify. Travis looked around. Dalton Spears had stepped out of the hardware store. Martha Henderson stood in the bakery doorway, phone raised. A dozen other phones were recording. The crowd on Main Street was watching, not with the fearful silence of yesterday, but with something harder. Something that looked like anger finding its spine. You think these people are going to testify against me? Travis scoffed. They were scared, past tense. Things are changing, Travis, and you're too drunk to see it. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the whiskey, feel the heat radiating off his body. My father will bury you. He'll bury your son. He'll bury everyone in this pathetic town. Maybe, but he'll have to do it in front of cameras this time. Something shifted in Travis's face. Not fear exactly, but the first faint recognition that the ground beneath him was no longer solid. The crowd was not backing down. The phones were still recording. And the 76-year-old woman in front of him, the woman he had tortured for entertainment just 24 hours ago, was looking at him with an expression that held no fear at all. This isn't over, he said. No, Margaret agreed. It isn't. Travis turned to his friends. Let's go. They climbed into the F-250 and peeled out tires screaming, leaving rubber on the asphalt like a child's tantrum made visible. Sandra appeared in the doorway shaking. Margaret, you shouldn't have done that. Probably not. Margaret's knees were trembling beneath her slacks, invisible to everyone but herself. But someone had to. Dean arrived 10 minutes later. He found his mother back in the diner pouring coffee as if nothing had happened. Ratchet told me what you did. I stood on a sidewalk. It's not exactly storming the beaches. You faced down the man who put a centipede in your ear. Margaret set down the coffee pot. Dean, I've been invisible in this town for 8 years. Today I stopped being invisible, and I'm not going back. Dean looked at her for a long time. Something changed in his expression. He was no longer looking at his elderly mother who needed protection. He was looking at a partner. I need to do something this afternoon, he said. I need to talk to Victor Kincaid. At his house? At his house. Margaret studied him. Your father and Victor were like brothers once. What they had, what they lost, it broke Walter's heart. Don't let their failure become your war. This isn't about their friendship, Mom. This is about right and wrong. Justice and revenge can look very similar from certain angles. Make sure you're choosing the right one. Dean kissed her forehead. I'll be back tonight. Stay here. Stay with Hammer. The Kincaid estate sat on 5 acres at the edge of town behind a wrought iron fence and a circular driveway. Colonial style, 2 stories of white siding and black shutters. Money, power, permanence. Dean was led through marble floors and a chandelier hallway to a study lined with dark wood and leather-bound books. Victor Kincaid sat behind a massive desk wearing a 3-piece suit. Despite the heat, his silver hair perfectly combed his eyes as hard as polished stone. Dean, sit. Dean remained standing. This won't take long. Tomorrow morning, federal agents are executing warrants. Your office, your home, Silverpine, the sheriff's office, everything gets seized. The charges include racketeering, money laundering, corruption, witness intimidation, and conspiracy. Your son gets arrested for assault and elder abuse. Victor's face didn't change, but his fingers tightened on the armrests of his chair. I'm offering you a chance to cooperate, Dean continued. Provide testimony about Silverpine. Help the prosecutors. They might recommend leniency. You want me to destroy myself. I want you to do the right thing. For once, Victor stood, walked to the window. Your father and I had plans, a garage, partners, equals. But I saw something bigger. A chance to shape this town. Walter couldn't understand that. He understood perfectly. He just saw what it was turning you into. Victor turned back. Principles don't build towns, Dean. Power builds towns. And your power required crushing anyone who disagreed. Earl Granger, Sandra Novak, Frank Jessup. Frank Jessup died in an accident. We have his email. We have 8 years of financial records. We have Dorothy Hale's documentation. We have everything, Victor. Victor was silent for a long moment. He pulled out an old photograph. Walter and Victor in 1985, young, hopeful, brothers in Greece. I've looked at this every day for 20 years, he said quietly, wondering what Walter would say about the man I've become. What do you think he'd say? I think he'd be disappointed. Then stop disappointing him. But Victor shook his head. I'm not going to cooperate. I'll fight. I have lawyers' connections. This will be a war. Then it's a war. Dean turned toward the door, then paused. My mother stood on a sidewalk today and looked your son in the eye. A 76-year-old woman with a bandaged ear. She didn't flinch. Your son drove away. He let that settle. Think about that tonight, Victor. Think about what it means that a waitress has more courage than the mayor of this town. He walked out, mounted his bike, rode away without looking back. That evening, Margaret sat in a lawn chair at the clubhouse surrounded by the gathered Brotherhood and their families. Kids running between bikes. Someone grilling burgers. It felt like the night before something permanent. Dean sat on the ground beside her chair. Tomorrow morning, he said, 6 a.m. warrants. I know. I need you to stay home. Stay safe. I will, but I'm leaving the porch light on for when you come to tell me it's done. The night deepened. Families departed. The Core brothers sat around a fire pit telling stories. Margaret watched the flames for a while, then found Ratchet. Take me home. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. At the house on Pinewood Drive, she went through her routine. Tea, photograph, porch light, bed. Around 3 in the morning, Dean's phone buzzed with a final text. Unknown number. Last chance. Drop this or people get hurt. He forwarded it to Rachel Dunbar and Nathan Aldridge. Added witness intimidation to the growing list. Then he closed his eyes and tried to sleep. Margaret woke at 5:30. Dean was already in the kitchen. Leather vest, phone in hand, coffee cold in front of him. They're executing warrants at 6, he said. 15 agents, 4 locations. Is there anything I can do? Stay here. He crossed the kitchen and hugged her. Not carefully, not gingerly, a real hug. The kind he used to give when he was 10 and scared of thunderstorms. I love you, Mom. I love you too. Now go, and be careful. He left. The screen door banged shut. She heard his boots on the steps, heard the Road King, heard him pull away, then silence. The particular silence of waiting. Margaret made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, watched the clock. At precisely 6 o'clock in the morning, as the sun crested the eastern mountains and painted Copper Bluff in shades of gold and amber, 15 federal agents in tactical gear executed 4 simultaneous warrants. Margaret was standing at her kitchen window when it began. From here, she could see the end of Pinewood Drive where it connected to Main Street. And on Main Street, she could see the black SUVs rolling past in convoy formation. 3 of them, then 4, then 5. Silent and purposeful, like predators moving through tall grass. Her phone buzzed. A text from Dean. It's happening. Stay inside. She typed back, I'm inside. Be careful. Then she stood at the window and watched history unfold through a 4x6 pane of glass. She couldn't see the mayor's office from here or the Kincaid estate or the Silverpine development headquarters on the east side of town. But she could see the aftermath. Within 20 minutes, the first news van appeared on Main Street, followed by a second, then a third. Reporters spilled out like water from a broken hydrant. Cameras shouldered microphones, extended all of them, moving toward the center of town with the particular urgency of people who smelled a story. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Dorothy Hale. They're at the mayor's office. I can see them from the library window. They're carrying out boxes. Then Sandra Novak. Federal agents at Silverpine. The building is surrounded. Then Roy Pemberton. Sheriff Loomis just got led out of his own station in handcuffs. God help me, I never thought I'd see the day. Margaret stood at her window reading each message, feeling something build in her chest that she couldn't quite name. It wasn't triumph, it wasn't relief. It was something quieter than both of those things. Something that felt like the first deep breath after being underwater for a very long time. At 7:15, Dean called. It's done. Victor Kincaid is in custody. Travis is in custody. Loomis is in custody. They're executing search warrants at all 3 locations. Rachel Dunbar says the initial document seizure is massive. Computers, files, financial records. Everything. Is anyone hurt? No, Victor came quietly. Travis tried to run out the back door. Didn't get far. Margaret closed her eyes. Good. That's good. Mom, I'm coming to get you. The news crews are going to want to talk to you. I don't want to talk to news crews. You don't have to, but people should know what happened to you. They should hear it from you. Dean, I'm a waitress. I pour coffee and carry plates. I'm not a spokesperson. You're the woman who built this case. Without what you gathered yesterday, without your testimony, without you standing up to Travis at the laundromat, none of this would have happened. Margaret was quiet for a moment. She looked at the photograph on the refrigerator. Dean at 19, Walter with his arm around the boy. Both of them grinning like they had discovered the secret to happiness. Give me an hour, she said. I need to put on something decent. She chose the navy dress again, the one she wore to church and funerals, and the occasional town council meeting when she felt like reminding elected officials that ordinary people were watching. She pinned her hair back, applied lipstick, looked at herself in the bathroom mirror, and saw a 76-year-old woman with a bandaged ear and tired eyes, and the particular expression of someone who had walked through fire and come out the other side still standing. You look like hell, Margaret, she told her reflection. But you look like hell with purpose. That counts for something. Dean arrived at 8 with Hammer and Deacon. Main Street had transformed in the 2 hours since the raids began. News vans lined both sides. Cameras and reporters clustered in front of the sheriff's station, the mayor's office, the Silverpine building. Copper Bluff, a town of 4,000 souls that had never made national news for anything, was suddenly the center of a media storm. Dean parked the truck and came around to help Margaret out. She waved him off. I can get out of a truck, Dean. I've been doing it for 60 years. Yes, ma'am. They walked toward Roy's diner, which Roy had opened early, understanding instinctively that the town needed its gathering place today more than ever. The booths were full. The counter was packed. Every seat occupied by someone who had woken to the sound of sirens and emerged to find their world rearranged. Margaret walked through the door and the diner went quiet. Not the fearful silence of yesterday morning when Travis Kincaid had walked in and sucked all the oxygen from the room. This was different. This was the silence of recognition, of witnessing. Then someone started clapping. It was Dalton Spears, the hardware store owner, standing at the counter with his coffee cup raised. Then Martha Henderson joined in from her booth by the window. Then Earl Granger, who had come straight from watching the agents carry boxes out of Silverpine. Then Sandra Novak, who was crying and clapping at the same time, mascara running down her cheeks. Then Dorothy Hale, standing in the doorway with her coat still on her face, split by the widest smile Margaret had ever seen on that stern face. The applause spread through the diner like a wave. 40 people, 50, all of them on their feet. All of them clapping for a 76-year-old waitress who had walked into work yesterday morning expecting nothing more than the usual routine and had instead become the catalyst for the most significant event in Copper Bluff's history. Margaret stood in the middle of it, feeling the sound wash over her, feeling the tears start, and not caring enough to stop them. She had spent her entire adult life being useful, being reliable, being the person who showed up on time and did her job and never asked for recognition. And now, in the autumn of her life, with a bandaged ear and aching joints and a heart that was beating too fast, she was being seen, truly seen, for maybe the first time. All right, she said, waving her hands. That's enough of that. Somebody pour me a coffee before I fall over. Roy himself brought her a cup, black, strong enough to stand a spoon in. He set it down in front of her, and then in a gesture that surprised everyone, including himself, he hugged her. This gruff private, hide-behind his grill man, wrapped his arms around Margaret Calloway and held on for 3 full seconds. I'm sorry, he said when he let go. I'm sorry I didn't stop them yesterday. I'm sorry I was afraid. You called my son. That was enough. That was everything. The morning unfolded in waves. Federal agents came and went. Reporters knocked on the diner door and were politely turned away by Hammer, who had positioned himself at the entrance like a leather-clad bouncer. Nathan Aldrich called with updates every hour. By noon, the full scope of the investigation had become clear. Silverpine Development's financial records revealed a pattern so blatant, it shocked even the federal prosecutors. 17 properties acquired under duress, $23 million in fraudulent transactions, paper trails leading directly to Victor Kincaid's personal accounts. At 2 in the afternoon, Rachel Dunbar arrived at the diner. pulled Dean aside first, then asked to speak with Margaret privately. They sat in Roy's back office, surrounded by boxes of napkins and cans of cooking oil. "Mrs. Calloway, I want you to know something." Rachel's voice was serious but warm. "In 20 years of federal law enforcement, I have never seen a civilian investigation as thorough as what you assembled in one afternoon. The testimony you organized, the documentation you collected from Dorothy, hell, the way you connected the property acquisitions to the pattern of intimidation. You did in 6 hours what a federal team would have taken weeks to accomplish. I just talked to people, asked questions, wrote things down. That's exactly what investigation is. Most people think it's guns and car chases. It's not. It's talking to people, asking questions, writing things down, and having the courage to keep going when every instinct tells you to stop." Rachel paused, studied Margaret with the appraising eye of someone who was used to reading people. "There's one more thing you should know. We found something during the search this morning. A black Cadillac sedan registered to a private investigation firm out of Reno. The car that was watching the house last night. Victor Kincaid hired them 3 days before the assault on you." Margaret frowned. 3 days before. He knew Travis was escalating. Knew your son had been asking questions about Travis's previous incidents. He hired the PI to build a file on Dean. Criminal history associates anything he could use for leverage. Rachel leaned forward. But here's the important part. Victor knew his son was dangerous. Knew Travis was likely to do something violent. And instead of stopping him, instead of protecting the people of this town, he hired someone to protect himself from the consequences. Margaret sat with that information for a long moment. The weight of it settled on her like a physical thing. A father who knew his son was a predator and chose to manage the fallout rather than prevent the harm. "The PI cooperated this morning," Rachel continued. "Gave us everything, recordings of his conversations with Kincaid. Surveillance photos, it's all on tape. Conspiracy to intimidate witnesses. Obstruction of justice. So it's over. The arrests are over. The trials are ahead. Victor's lawyers will fight hard. But between the financial records, the witness testimony, the PMI's cooperation, and Loomis turning state's evidence, the case is airtight." Rachel stood, extended her hand. "Mrs. Calloway, you should be proud of what you've done." Margaret shook her hand. "I'll be proud when the sentencing is finished. Until then, I'll be careful." That's the smartest thing anyone said to me today. That evening, Nathan Aldridge came to the diner in person. The witnesses had gathered there, naturally drawn by the need to be together to process what they had set in motion. Earl, Sandra, Dorothy, Roy, Margaret. A dozen members of the Iron Brotherhood filled the remaining booths and counter stools. Aldridge stood at the front, legal pad in hand. "I wanted to give you an update before it hits the news tonight. The United States Attorney has filed formal charges. Victor Kincaid faces RICO conspiracy, money laundering, corruption, witness, intimidation, and accessory in the death of Frank Jessup. He's looking at 25 years minimum." A murmur ran through the diner. Margaret felt Sandra grab her hand under the table. "Travis Kincaid faces aggravated assault, elder abuse, hate crimes, and witness intimidation. Given his prior record and the severity of the assault on Mrs. Calloway, the prosecutor is pushing for 15 years. No plea deals. Both Kincaids will stand trial." "What about Sheriff Loomis?" Someone called from the back. "Loomis cut a deal. He's pleading guilty to corruption and obstruction in exchange for testimony against the Kincaids. He'll serve 5 years. He's also agreed to forfeit his pension and resign immediately." Earl muttered something under his breath that Margaret chose not to hear. Aldridge continued, "The state attorney general has appointed a special prosecutor for the local cases. There will be restitution for every business that was damaged or forced out. The Silverpine properties are being seized under the asset forfeiture laws. Proceeds will go to the victims." Dorothy spoke from her seat by the window. "What about Frank Jessup's family?" "The FBI reopened the investigation this morning. They found evidence in Kincaid's seized computers. Emails discussing, and I quote, taking care of the Jessup problem. Payments to an individual with known arson experience." Aldridge paused. His expression was grim. "It's now a murder investigation. Frank Jessup's widow will finally get justice." The diner fell silent. Margaret thought about Frank, about the email Dorothy had shown her. who had tried to do the right thing and paid for it with his life. She thought about how close she had come to being another name on that list. Another casualty of power exercised without conscience. Roy stood, his voice carried across the quiet diner. I think we owe someone a debt of gratitude. He looked at Margaret. Most of us were too scared to stand up. This woman wasn't. She had a centipede put in her ear yesterday morning, and by yesterday afternoon, she was knocking on doors with a notebook, building the case that just brought down Victor Kincaid. Margaret shook her head. I didn't build anything alone. Earl gave me his evidence, even though he was afraid. Sandra shared her documentation, knowing they might come after her again. Dorothy kept records for 3 years, waiting for someone to ask. Roy called my son when I needed help most. She paused. And Dean. My son brought the lawyers and the federal agents and the protection that made it safe for all of us to speak. She looked around the diner, at the faces she had served coffee to for 8 years, at the people who had been afraid yesterday and were brave today. We did this together. That's the only way it could have worked. When a CNN reporter finally managed to get past Hammer and thrust a microphone toward Margaret, she said simply, I'm a waitress. I serve people. That's what I do. Yesterday, I served justice instead of coffee. Today, I'm back to coffee. It's easier on the nerves. The quote went viral by morning. The weeks that followed moved with the particular velocity of events that had been building pressure for years and were finally released. Federal prosecutors worked around the clock preparing the cases. Defense attorneys filed motions. Reporters dug deeper. More victims came forward, and people who had been silent for years now finding the courage to speak because Margaret Calloway, a 76-year-old waitress with a bandaged ear, had shown them it was possible. Margaret returned to her routine. Alarm at 5:45. Shower, dress, lipstick. Drive to the diner. Pour coffee. Take orders. Smile at familiar faces. But things were different now. People looked at her differently. Not with the unseeing gaze she had grown accustomed to the way people look at wallpaper or furniture. They saw her. They nodded. They said thank you sometimes without explaining what for. She understood. She always understood. 3 months after the raid, the trials began. Victor Kincaid's trial was held in a federal courthouse in Reno. The venue changed due to the impossibility of finding an impartial jury in the county Victor had controlled for 8 years. The prosecution called 47 witnesses over 11 days. Business owners who had been squeezed out of properties they had owned for decades. Property sellers who had been pressured through fabricated code violations and sudden tax increases. Former county employees who had been coerced into looking the other way while permits were denied and inspections were weaponized. Each witness added another layer to the portrait of a man who had treated an entire town as his personal resource, extractable and disposable. Sheriff Loomis took the stand on day 4 and spoke for 6 hours. He detailed every buried investigation, every ignored complaint, every phone call from the mayor's office, instructing him to stand down. He described the system Victor had built a network of obligation and intimidation so thorough that it had become invisible to the people living inside it, the way water becomes invisible to fish. He wept twice during his testimony. Once when describing the night he drove to the ruins of Frank Jessup's house and stood in the ashes knowing what had happened. And once when the prosecutor asked him why he hadn't come forward sooner. Because I was afraid, Loomis said. Because I had been afraid for so long that I forgot there was another way to live. Margaret attended every day of the trial. She drove the 2 hours to Reno each morning in Walter's old truck, arriving early enough to find her seat in the 3rd row of the gallery before the courtroom filled. She wore her navy dress. Her reading glasses hung on a chain around her neck. Her hands were folded in her lap. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough. Victor Kincaid couldn't avoid seeing her. This small, quiet woman with a scar inside her ear. Sitting there day after day, watching justice unfold with the same patient attention she gave to filling salt shakers and folding napkins around silverware. She never looked away when difficult evidence was presented. She never flinched when defense attorneys tried to discredit witnesses. She simply sat and watched the way she had watched thousands of customers come and go through Roy's diner, seeing everything, judging nothing, remembering it all. On the 7th day, Earl Granger took the stand. He described the vandalism of his welding shop in precise military detail. The kind of testimony that came from a man who had spent 22 years writing reports for the United States Navy. He showed the security footage. He identified the tattoo on Travis Kincaid's wrist. And then he said something that wasn't in his prepared testimony. I want the court to know, Earl said, his voice steady and clear, that the woman sitting in the third row is the reason I'm here today. I was too afraid to speak up on my own. Margaret Calloway knocked on my door with a bandage on her ear and a notebook in her hand 3 hours after being assaulted and asked me to tell her the truth. She gave me the courage to be here. She gave all of us that courage. The courtroom turned to look at Margaret. She kept her eyes forward, her expression unchanged. But Dean sitting beside her felt her hand tighten on the armrest. Sandra Novak testified next. Then Dorothy Hale, who walked the jury through 8 years of documentation with the methodical precision of a woman who had graded 10,000 research papers and knew the difference between evidence and opinion. She connected every property acquisition, every business closure, every suspicious coincidence into a narrative so clear and damning that even Victor's defense attorneys stopped taking notes. The financial evidence was devastating. $23 million moved through shell companies. 17 properties acquired at below market value from owners under duress. Payoffs to county officials documented in meticulous detail by Victor's own accountant, who had turned state's witness in exchange for immunity. Bank records showed deposits into offshore accounts that corresponded precisely with the dates of each forced property sale. The paper trail was so complete, so meticulously maintained by a man who never imagined anyone would look, that it read like a confession written in numbers. But it was the evidence surrounding Frank Jessup's death that sealed Victor's fate. The FBI had found emails on his personal computer sent from an encrypted account he thought was untraceable, discussing the need to resolve the Jessup situation permanently. Phone records showed calls to a man named Darren Cahill, a drifter with 2 prior arson convictions in the weeks before and after the fire. Cahill was arrested in a motel outside Reno and confessed within hours. By the end of week 2, even Victor's expensive lawyers were recommending a plea deal. He refused. Pride or delusion, or maybe just the inability to accept that his kingdom had fallen. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge, a woman in her 60s who had grown up in a small Nevada town not unlike Copper Bluff, looked at Victor Kincaid with something between pity and contempt. Mr. Kincaid, you held a position of public trust for 8 years. Instead of serving your community, you exploited it. Instead of protecting the vulnerable, you empowered those who preyed on them. You enriched yourself through intimidation and fraud. And when a man named Frank Jessup dared to oppose you, you arranged his murder and lived with the consequences for 6 years without an apparent moment of remorse. She paused. The courtroom was silent. The law allows me to sentence you to a maximum of 30 years. Given the scope of your crimes, including your role in the death of Frank Jessup, I am sentencing you to 25 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. Victor Kincaid showed no emotion, but as the marshals led him away in handcuffs, he looked back at the gallery. His eyes found Margaret. What passed between them wasn't hatred or regret, it was simply the end. The final acknowledgement that the world he had built on fear and silence had been undone by a woman with a notebook. Margaret held his gaze until the courtroom doors closed behind him. Then she turned to Dean, who was sitting beside her, and said, "Let's go home." Travis Kincaid's trial was shorter but no less damning. It was held in the same Reno courthouse, 3 weeks after his father's sentencing. The atmosphere was different this time. The media had followed the story through Victor's conviction, and now the country was watching. The assault video had been viewed 40 million times. Margaret Calloway's name had become synonymous with a particular kind of American courage, the quiet, stubborn, ordinary kind that didn't look like courage at all until you understood what it cost. Travis entered the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit. His wrists shackled his face, carrying the particular emptiness of a man who had spent 3 months in a federal holding facility, learning what it meant to be powerless. He looked smaller than Margaret remembered, thinner. The arrogance that had defined him, that effortless cruelty that came from never facing consequences, had been replaced by something hollow. He looked, Margaret thought, like a man who had been running on borrowed time and had finally been presented with the bill. Margaret was called to testify on the second day. She walked to the witness stand in her navy dress, her hair pinned back, her reading glasses folded in her hand. The courtroom was full. News cameras lined the back wall. The jury, 12 strangers who had never set foot in Copper Bluff, watched her with careful attention. The prosecutor, a young woman named Sarah Redmond, who had been handpicked by the state attorney general for the case, guided Margaret through her testimony with the precision of a surgeon. She began not with the assault, but with the morning. The alarm clock at 5:45, the photograph of Walter on the nightstand, the drive to the diner, the bear claws from the bakery. Margaret told it all, in order, in detail, with the same careful attention to facts and sequence that she had shown in Dorothy Hale's back office with her notebook. She described the moment Travis and his crew walked into the diner, the mockery, the spilled coffee, the hands on her shoulders, the container with the centipede. When she reached the moment Travis pushed the centipede into her ear, her voice dropped. The courtroom was absolutely still. 12 jurors leaned forward in their seats. A court reporter's fingers froze above her keys. "I felt its legs first," Margaret said. "On the outside of my ear, then inside, then the bite. It was like someone drove a hot needle straight into my brain. I screamed. I didn't know I could make a sound like that. Like an animal, like something being taken apart." She paused, took a breath, and then I was on my knees, on the floor of a diner where I had worked for 8 years, surrounded by people I had served coffee to every morning. And no one moved, no one helped, because they were afraid of the man who had just put a venomous creature inside my body for entertainment. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. "I don't blame them," Margaret continued. "I understand fear. I've lived in the same town. I've seen what happens to people who cross the Kincaid family. But I want the jury to understand something. What Travis Kincaid did to me wasn't just an assault on my body. It was an assault on an entire community, on their sense of safety, on their belief that someone somewhere would protect them." She looked directly at the jury. "I'm 76 years old. I've lived a good life. I've raised a son. I've buried a husband. I've poured more cups of coffee than I can count. And on the worst morning of my life, I learned that the only person who was going to stand up for me was me. So I did. And I'm asking you to finish what I started." The prosecutor then played the video, Sandra Novak's footage of the assault. The courtroom watched in silence as Travis Kincaid held up the centipede, as Marcus Webb restrained Margaret, as the creature was pushed into her ear, as she screamed and fell. Several jurors looked away. One woman in the back row wiped her eyes. Travis's lawyer tried. He argued substance abuse. He argued privileged upbringing and lack of proper boundaries. He argued that his client needed treatment, not prison. He even suggested once that Margaret might have exaggerated the severity of the incident. Margaret, still on the witness stand, met Travis's eyes across the courtroom for the first time. He looked smaller than she remembered, thinner. The arrogance had curdled into something that resembled fear, though whether it was fear of prison or fear of becoming irrelevant, she couldn't tell. Mrs. Calloway, the defense attorney, said, "Isn't it possible that you're overstating the impact of this incident, that the injury, while regrettable, was not as severe as you've described?" Margaret looked at him with the steady gaze of a woman who had spent 3 decades reading the faces of customers who didn't think she was paying attention. "Sir, I had a 6-inch venomous centipede forced into my ear canal, while a grown man held me in place and another one filmed it for social media. If you can tell me how to overstate that, I'd be interested to hear." A sound rippled through the gallery, not quite laughter, something harder than that. The sound of a room deciding collectively that they had heard enough. The jury deliberated for 2 hours, guilty on all counts, 15 years. Eligible for parole after 10 with good behavior. As the bailiffs took Travis away, he looked back at Margaret. His mouth moved, forming words she couldn't quite hear across the courtroom. But she could read lips well enough. "This isn't over." Margaret didn't respond. For Travis Kincaid, it was over. He just didn't know it yet. She walked out of the courthouse into the Nevada sunshine, Dean beside her. The reporters were waiting, as they always were, microphones extended. Questions shouted from behind barriers. "Mrs. Calloway, how do you feel about the verdict? Mrs. Calloway, do you have a message for other victims? Mrs. Calloway, what's next?" She stopped, turned to face the camera, nervous. Her son put his hand on her shoulder, ready to steer her away, but she shook her head. "I'm going home," she said. "I'm going to change out of this dress. I'm going to And tomorrow morning, then I'm going to go to work. Because that's what I do. That's what I've always done. She paused. And if anyone in Copper Bluff needs a cup of coffee or a place to sit or someone to listen, Roy's Diner opens at 8. She turned and walked away. Dean fell into step beside her. Behind them, the cameras kept rolling, but Margaret was already thinking about tomorrow's breakfast special and whether Roy had remembered to order more eggs. 2 weeks after Travis's sentencing, Copper Bluff held a special election for interim mayor. Margaret stood outside the community center watching voters stream in. The ballot had 3 names. One of them was Dorothy Hale. I can't believe I let them talk me into this, Dorothy said, standing beside Margaret in a navy pantsuit, her gray hair styled professionally. I'm a retired teacher. I have no business running to Tavern. You documented corruption for 3 years when everyone else looked away. You understand how power should work and how it shouldn't. This town needs exactly that. By 8 o'clock that evening, the results were in. Dorothy Hale, 67% of the vote, not even close. As Dorothy took the stage for her acceptance speech, she found Margaret in the crowd and mouthed 2 words. Thank you. Margaret nodded, then slipped out the back. She had never liked crowds or attention. Dean was waiting outside, leaning against his road king. You leaving already? I've got an early shift tomorrow. Roy's doing the lunch special, and he burns the meatloaf if I'm not there to watch him. Dean rode through Copper Bluff one more time that evening, and Margaret watched from the truck as the town revealed its transformation. Henderson's Bakery had a new sign. Martha Henderson had bought back the building from the seized Silverpine assets for a fraction of what she had been forced to sell it for. Dalton Spears' hardware store was expanding into the vacant space next door. Another Silverpine property returned to the community at fair prices. Earl Granger's welding shop had a fresh coat of blue paint and a new sign. Granger Welding, 46 years of honest work. Sandra Novak's laundromat had lines of customers waiting for machines. Word had spread about her courage in testifying. The community was supporting her with their business. And Roy's Diner had a waiting list for tables every night. Roy had hired 2 additional waitresses, but he told Margaret she was still his number 1, and he meant it. She worked 5 days a week now instead of 6, not because she couldn't handle the hours, but because Dean had convinced her that rest was not weakness. She spent her day off in the garden tending the rose bushes that had needed pruning since before any of this started. Walter had planted them the year they moved in. 23 bushes, one for each year of their marriage at that point. Margaret had continued the tradition after he died, adding a new bush each anniversary. There were now 47 roses in Margaret Calloway's backyard, and every single one was blooming. The town itself was healing in ways both visible and invisible. A new sheriff had been appointed by the governor, a woman named Patricia Vega, who had spent 15 years with the state police and had no connections to anyone in Churchill County. She arrived in Copper Bluff with a mandate to rebuild public trust and a personality that suggested she took that mandate seriously. Within her first month, she had reopened investigations into every complaint that Loomis had buried. Within her second month, she had established a community advisory board that included Earl Granger, Sandra Novak, and Roy Pemberton. The Silverpine properties were being returned to the community through a court-supervised process. Businesses that had been forced out were given first right of refusal to buy back their buildings at assessed value, with the proceeds going to a restitution fund for victims. It was slow work complicated by legal proceedings and competing claims, but it was happening. One storefront at a time, Copper Bluff was being given back to its people. 6 months after the federal raid on a warm spring evening, Copper Bluff held a community celebration in the town square. The occasion was the grand reopening of Calloway and Granger custom motorcycles. Earl Granger had approached Dean 3 months earlier with a proposal. Your father and my father were friends. Your father and Victor Kincaid planned a garage together, but that fell apart. What if we honored Walter's dream properly? This time partners, equals. Dean had been skeptical at first. He had the clubhouse, his brothers, his life on the road. But Earl had persisted. I'm 72 years old. I can still work metal, but I can't run a business alone anymore. You've got the business sense, the connections, the reputation. Together we build what our fathers should have built. The garage sat where Earl's welding shop had been expanded into the lot next door. Through the large bay windows, you could see classic motorcycles in various states of restoration. A 1947 knucklehead, a 1965 panhead, a 1978 shovelhead, the same model Walter had owned. The grand opening drew 300 people, members from 5 different Hells Angels chapters, veterans from the Gulf War charity rides Dean organized, families from Copper Bluff who had been helped when the town needed it most. Mayor Dorothy Hale cut the ribbon. This garage represents everything Copper Bluff should be. Honest work, fair dealing, community over profit. Walter Calloway would be proud. Inside, mounted above the main workbench, hung a photograph. Walter Calloway, 1987, standing beside his shovelhead, that knowing smile. Below it, a brass plaque, built on principles, not promises. And beside it, the photograph from 1985. Walter and Victor Kincaid, young and hopeful, standing in front of their planned garage. A reminder and a warning kept where it could be seen every day. As the celebration wound down, Margaret found Dean in the back office going over invoices with Earl. "You're doing paperwork at your own grand opening." She shook her head. "Come outside, there's someone who wants to meet you." In the parking lot, a young man stood beside a beat-up Honda motorcycle, maybe 22 or 23, wearing mechanic's coveralls with Miguel stitched on the pocket. "Mr. Calloway, I'm Miguel Jessup. Frank Jessup was my uncle." Dean shook his hand. "I'm sorry about what happened to him." "Me too, but I wanted to thank you. The FBI reopened his case because of you and your mother. They arrested the man who started the fire last month. My family finally has justice." He gestured to the Honda. "I'm starting community college in the fall. Mechanical engineering. The restitution money from the Silverpine assets is paying for school. My uncle always said education was the way out. Now I can do it." "Your uncle was a brave man. He stood up when it mattered." "So did your mother." Miguel looked at Margaret with the particular reverence that young people sometimes showed to old people who had earned it. "Mrs. Calloway, you served me pancakes at Roy's last month. I don't think you knew who I was." "I remember you," Margaret said. "You ordered the short stack with extra syrup, and you left a $2 tip on a $4 check." Miguel smiled. "My uncle taught me to tip well. Said you can tell a man's character by how he treats waitresses." "Your uncle was right." Margaret squeezed his hand. "When you graduate, you come see us. There'll be a place for you here." "Thank you, ma'am, both of you." As Miguel rode away on his beat-up Honda, Margaret slipped her arm through Dean's. "You gave that boy hope. You gave this whole town hope. We gave them hope, Mom, you and me, and Dad. Your father's dream. Finally realized. Just took 30 years and a different partner." Margaret touched her right ear. It was fully healed now. No bandage, no pain, just a small scar inside the canal that the doctor said would fade with time. She could hear perfectly. The doctor had called it remarkable given her age and the severity of the injury. Margaret called it stubbornness. She had refused to let Travis Kincaid take anything from her permanently. Not her hearing, not her dignity, not her willingness to show up every morning and do her job and be part of a community that needed her. That night, after the guests had gone home and the parking lot was empty and the garage stood quiet in the moonlight, Margaret walked through the bay one last time. She ran her hand along the workbench where Dean and Earl would stand tomorrow morning, rebuilding engines and restoring machines and teaching each other skills that had been passed down through generations. She stopped beneath Walter's photograph, looked up at that face she had loved for 47 years. "We did it, Walter. Not the way you planned. Not with Victor, but it's done. Your garage, your dream, built by your son and your friend's son, built the right way." She touched the brass plaque, built on principles, not promises. "I wish you could see it. I wish you could see Dean behind that workbench, covered in grease, grinning the way you used to. I wish you could see this town breathing again, standing up again after all those years of holding its breath." She paused. Outside, she could hear the distant rumble of a Harley. Dean making one last circuit of the town before heading home. "I need to tell you something. When Travis put that centipede in my ear, when the pain hit and I fell to my knees, the first thing I thought was that I wanted to die. Not because of the pain, because of the humiliation. Because I was 76 years old and on my knees in a diner full of people who wouldn't help me, and I thought this is how it ends. Not with dignity, not with grace, just an old woman on the floor with a bug in her ear and strangers laughing. Her voice was steady, her eyes were dry. But then I thought about you, About the morning you taught Dean to ride. About the way you looked at me across the kitchen table every night for 43 years. About what you said at the end. Strength is about protecting those who can't protect themselves. And I realized I wasn't helpless. I wasn't done. I was just on my knees, and you can get up from your knees. People do it every day. She straightened the photograph on the wall, adjusted the plaque so it hung perfectly level. So I got up, and I kept going. And now Travis Kincaid is in a cell, and Victor Kincaid is in a cell, and this town is free, and your garage is open, and your son is the man you raised him to be. She kissed her fingertips and touched them to the glass. Rest easy, Walter. Your town is safe. Your dream is real. And your wife kept her feet. She walked out of the garage and locked the door behind her. Dean was waiting in the parking lot, engine idling. He had come back to check on her the way he always did, the way Walter always had. Ready to go home, Mom? Ready. She climbed on the back of his Road King, held on as he eased out of the parking lot and onto Main Street. They rode through Copper Bluff at 25 miles an hour, slow enough to see everything. The closed storefronts that were reopening, the new signs going up, the lights in Dorothy Hale's office still burning as she worked late, rebuilding a town's government from the ground up. Dean pulled into the driveway on Pinewood Drive. Margaret dismounted, handed him the helmet. You staying tonight? If that's okay, I'm too tired to ride back to the clubhouse. Your room is always ready. I changed the sheets this morning. He smiled. Some things never changed. Mothers always taking care of their sons no matter how old they got. Margaret went inside and put the kettle on, made herself a cup of tea, sat in her favorite chair, the one by the window where she could see the street. Dean came in, locked the door, checked the windows out of habit, even though there was nothing to check for anymore. Good night, Mom. Good night, Dean. He headed upstairs. She heard his boots on the old wooden steps, heard the door to his childhood bedroom open and close, heard the bed springs creak as he lay down. And then silence. Margaret sat in her chair, drinking her tea, looking out the window at the quiet street. The porch light was on. She always left it on. Had left it on every night since Walter died, and every night since Dean left home, and every night of her 76 years of being the person who kept the light burning for the people she loved. Her phone buzzed on the side table. A text from Rachel Dunbar. Thought you'd want to know. Victor Kincaid's appeal was denied. He'll serve the full 25 years. It's over. Margaret read the message twice, set the phone down, picked up her tea. It was over. Victor Kincaid would spend his remaining years behind bars, his kingdom reduced to a 6x8 cell. Travis would serve his 15 years learning the lesson his father never taught him, that actions had consequences, regardless of your last name. Sheriff Loomis would serve his 5, and maybe with time find whatever remained of the man he had been before the compromises started. And Copper Bluff would rebuild, one day at a time, one honest transaction at a time, one act of courage at a time. Tomorrow she would wake at 5:45. She would shower and dress and pin her hair back and put on lipstick. She would drive the 12 minutes to Roy's Diner in Walter's old truck. She would pour coffee and serve breakfast and fold napkins and refill salt shakers. She would smile at familiar faces and learn new names and do the 1,000 small things that held a community together. She would be Margaret Calloway, waitress, mother, widow, 76 years old and still standing. And that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything. She finished her tea, rinsed the cup, turned off the kitchen light, walked to the nightstand where Walter's photograph sat in its silver frame, touched the glass with her fingertip. Another day, Walter, another good day. She climbed into bed, pulled the covers up, closed her eyes. Outside, the desert night settled over Copper Bluff like a blessing. The stars turned in their ancient courses. The wind whispered through the sage. And in a small house on Pinewood Drive, Margaret Calloway slept peacefully, knowing that tomorrow would bring not fear but coffee, not crisis but routine, not the extraordinary but the ordinary, which was in the end the most extraordinary thing of all. Justice had come to Copper Bluff. It had arrived not on a Harley Davidson, though the Harleys had helped. It had arrived in a notebook, in a banker's box, in the quiet courage of a 76-year-old waitress who decided on the worst day of her life that she was not finished yet. And she wasn't. She was just getting started. The next morning at 5:45, Margaret Calloway's alarm clock rattled to life. She silenced it with the practiced motion of someone who had been waking at this hour for 40 years. She sat on the edge of the bed, allowing her joints to remember their purpose. She reached for the reading lamp, the one shaped like an old-fashioned lantern. The warm light spilled across the room, catching the silver frame on the opposite nightstand. Walter Calloway looked back at her from 2018. That slight smile, that knowing gaze, the smile of a man who always believed the good in people would win out in the end, even when the evidence suggested otherwise. She touched the frame lightly. "Morning, Walter," she whispered. "Another day." She showered, dressed in her powder blue uniform, pinned her hair back, applied lipstick, ate 2 scrambled eggs and 1 slice of toast, drank black coffee from Dean's lopsided mug, checked the rose bushes through the kitchen window, drove 12 minutes to Roy's Diner in a 2008 Ford F-150. That still smelled faintly of motor oil and belonged to a man who had been dead for 6 years, but whose presence had never left. She let herself in through the back door at 7:45. Roy was at the grill. The coffee was fresh. The bear claws were waiting. And through the front windows, Main Street was waking up the way it always did, the way it always would. Copper Bluff, Nevada, a town of 4,000 souls. No longer the loneliest road in America, just home.